Hi everyone. I decided to base my research and screencast on ancient Egyptian art, specifically the symbols and representations of the human body within it. I've always been fascinated by art of ancient Egypt, and I felt it best suited my major and minor. As an English literature major, we're constantly looking for symbols and how they create meaning as well as support meaning within a text. And as a painting minor, we study the human body and human anatomy and how it's represented within different types of art. So I felt this topic best suited me. So I wanted to briefly go over some of the things we talked about in class to kind of set up my topic. So Greek historian Herodotus claimed that Egypt was the gift of the Nile because of its reliance on the resources provided by the Nile. The Nile River flowed through Egypt and into the Mediterranean Sea, which opened up gateways for trade, as well as created fertile land that benefited Egyptian culture. Religion was fully integrated into the lives of Egyptians. They worshipped the pantheon of gods and often referred to their rulers as gods in human form or sons of gods. They held them to this high standard because they felt that gods would be the messengers, or they'd be the messengers of the gods. There was a unification of Egypt under a single ruler, which was followed by dynastic ruling. So these rulers and their families passed down rule from generation to generation until the empire was formed. These rulers were meant to be protectors on all fronts, meaning that Egyptian citizens believed that their rulers would protect them from outside aggression as well as natural catastrophe, um, like floods and so on, through their relationship with the gods. So, as an overview of ancient Egyptian art, Alice Cartacci believed that art had no aesthetic value in this world, meaning the world of ancient Egypt. Art was a symbol of nature. It had to capture its essence rather than imitate it. Um, there's a lot of naturalism presented in ancient Egyptian art, which I'll talk about in the following slides. Um, there's an anonymity in art because artists were classified as craftsmen, not as artists. Artist wasn't a word of classification for them. And these craftsmen wouldn't sign their art pieces like a lot of artists did in later periods. So we have the art pieces, we just don't know who really created them. Um, the style of the art being created was determined by the spirituality of the content they were being commissioned for. And through the art that we see that these artisans were skilled in observation and perception, um, through not only the hieroglyphics presented, but also how they capture the essence of the human body and of these animals that are being shown, um, and how accurate they are. We see that they are for sure skilled in observation and perception. There are several periods that we study, not only in our class, but just in general when looking into into ancient Egyptian art. There's the pre-dynastic period, early dynastic period, the Old Kingdom period, Middle Kingdom period, New Kingdom period, and late Egyptian art. Now, some of the more important um, periods to note are the Old Kingdom, because it is where we begin to see the balancing of opposites, which ancient Egyptians were big on harmony and creating balance not only within their lives, but also within their art. And it's where we see symbolism at its highest peak, as well as an expression of creation. Um, and it's the period where we are able to see the Great Sphinx on Khafre's complex. Then there is the Middle Kingdom, where there's a change occurring within the society itself. So it's a time for change to appear within its art as well. So rather than the natural imagery, like the animals and plants that we see in previous periods, we are starting to see in the Middle Kingdom period how humans become the focus of attention as well as Pharaohic architecture. And the New Kingdom period, which is the golden age of Egyptian art. It's when the empire was established, and it's the highest point in Egyptian history where we are shown high levels of wealth and beauty, which can be seen in Nefertiti's bust and the mask of King Tut. So, an important thing that I found was that ancient Egyptians were very big on structure. In a lot of their arts, specifically within the two-dimensional art, but also in three-dimensional art, there is a hierarchical structure. They are registers that not only depict different parts of a story, but also show a difference of importance. So for instance, in the Palette of Narmer, like we learned about in class, in the top register of the three registers, Narmer is present in that top register. And then as you go down the register, you see that there are individuals presented that are not as significant. There's also a hierarchical scale, which we also see in the Palette of Narmer on its opposite side, where Narmer is depicted as the largest figure on the palette, and the other figures are minuscule in comparison to him. This creates it shows how magnificent he was and how important he was within ancient Egyptian society. If those two things were not present within art, it was to depict chaos, like this fighting scene from King Tut's tomb. Proportions were really big in ancient Egyptian art, and they became a focus as well as composite poses in order to create an idealized version of the people they were presenting. There was a structural integrity and balance created through a canon of proportions. So it was a mathematical equation that is actually really close to human anatomical proportions, that was created through this canon of proportions in order to create balance and to create stability, like shown in the Palette of Narmer. There were two types of art created: three-dimensional art, which is like sculpture and statues. It was more formal, but aimed to produce realism, whereas two-dimensional art, like reliefs and painting, was aimed to focus on representative elements of scenes being depicted. So, symbolism within ancient Egyptian art. There was a lot of symbolism presented. One being the crowns that were presented. So, like in the Palette of Narmer and in this diagram from our book, there is the crown of Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, and the double crown that signified the unity of ancient Egypt. There was the Nemes headdress that was placed on rulers, the heads of rulers like King Tut, which the design of it looks like this, except it's striped blue and white to signify high societal status. The wasp scepter and the crook and flail, which the crook and flail is presented here and the scepter presented here, they were meant to signify dominion and power. The ankh was a symbol that looks like a cross and key, um, meant to signify life, eternal life specifically, the morning sun, heaven and earth, and male and female principles. The Udjat was, or the Eye of Ra, or Eye of Horus, um, was meant to be a protective symbol, often paying homage to the goddess Wadjet and Horus, both protective gods. The scarab was the symbol of the beetle, that was meant to signify the gods and life coming from death. The sensen was a lotus flower that was the symbol of life, creation, rebirth, and specifically the sun. There was a lot of sun imagery presented throughout ancient Egyptian art and a lot of worship of the sun and sun gods. The Djed was a symbol of stability, and it symbolized resurrection and eternal life. Here are some examples of the symbolism. Here we have the Eye of Ra, or the Udjat. And then we have the Ankh, the Djed, and the Scepter of Waz. And then here we have a scene being depicted on the shape of a scarab, which a lot of these were placed on amulets throughout ancient Egyptian life. So, incorporation of hieroglyphics in ancient Egyptian art, this has a lot to do with the symbolism that I was talking about. So, with society being largely illiterate, these symbols helped depict these stories to people who couldn't read. The symbols put together created a language that represented not only what they were depicting, but often phonetic sounds. This duality was referred to as igographic. There was a relationship between text and image. On statues, there was hieroglyphics placed on the back or the base in order to like caption the statues, and with reliefs, the captions and or texts were placed on the actual reliefs in order to elaborate on the scene. Representations of the human body within ancient Egyptian art. So to begin, there was a lot of idealization and naturalism presented within. It began with idealization and slowly with different stances created more naturalistic feel. There were a lot of postures present frequently in ancient Egyptian art. There was standing, stand walking, squatting, sitting cross-legged, sitting high on a seat, and action. So here are some examples of those postures. The stand walking and standing created a very firm stance that was balanced. The sitting was also very balanced, but it was more natural because these figures were not standing up straight. We are able to see parts of the human body that are not well seen with the standing figures. Then we have action poses and the seated poses. All representations of the human body were different. However, the standing poses and seated poses were more so seen in royalty, and the action and seated poses were more so seen in everyday, or action and sitting cross-legged poses were seen for scribes and butchers and other working people. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation.